Some stories just make me wonder, is this the world's worst criminal? A crippling level of fear can strike the population of a city when a predator grasps the attention of the media. Bostonians suffered from the terror of the Boston Strangler in the 1960s. New York City saw the Son of Sam in the 1970s. But the fall of 1977 would bring that same level of fear to the citizens of Los Angeles, California. On the night of October the 18th, the body of 19-year-old Yolanda Washington was found lying nude and face down on the hillside of Forest Lawn Memorial Park. She was a known prostitute and had been sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. Witnesses had last seen her on the corner of Sunset and Vine, where she had gotten into a car. No one could really describe that car, and considering her work, there was nothing all that out of the ordinary about the pickup. The murder of a Hollywood sex worker was only worth a passing mention in the Los Angeles Times 2 days later. Her killing received no headline and was basically tucked inside another article on page 17. Another body would soon be found by a paperboy in the pre-dawn hours of Halloween. When police arrived, investigators found that the victim had been tied at her ankles and had deep ligature marks around her neck. She had clearly been strangled to death and left there in the nude. She was later identified as Judy Miller, another prostitute that had been working the Hollywood streets, but Judy was only 15 years old. The murders of Yolanda Washington and Judy Miller were strikingly similar, and detectives quickly formed the opinion that it was the work of the same killer. The ligature marks were nearly identical. Both had been sexually assaulted, and both bodies had been discarded in a similar manner and condition. But while investigators were just starting to put together the pieces, the serial killer continued. On November 6th, the body of 21-year-old Lisa Kasten, a Hollywood resident working as a waitress with aspirations of becoming a dancer, was found dead near a country club in the neighborhood of Glendale. Following those killings, 12-year-old Dolores Cepeda and 14-year-old Sonia Johnson had been together at their local mall shopping when they went missing. On November 20th, a week after their parents had reported them missing, their bodies were found near Dodger Stadium. Like the first two victims, these children were left in the nude and discarded on a hill. But there was a clear difference. These victims were getting younger and younger, the killer getting more malicious and more brazen. A young boy came forward and stated that he had seen the two girls speaking to a man before getting into his full-size sedan. Detectives began to form the opinion that the killer could be impersonating a police officer in order to coerce victims into his vehicle. Immediately following that discovery, on the same day actually, Christina Weckler, 20 years old, was found just blocks away and in the same condition. Weckler had been dumped at the side of a residential road, but there was another difference from the other victims. Her ligature marks at the neck were less severe, and it was discovered that she had also been injected with cleaning fluid. On the 23rd, Jane King, a 28-year-old Hollywood starlet, was found. She had been last seen at a bus stop and was found dead on a highway off-ramp. The newspapers began detailing the series of crimes and added a label to the killer, the Hillside Strangler. The sensationalism sold copies, and the side effect was greater awareness at best and fostering widespread panic at worst. People, especially young women, were terrified of this prolific predator. Tuesday, November 29th. The nude body of Lauren Wagner, 18 years old, was discovered in the hills of Mount Washington. In addition to the telltale ligature marks that matched most of the other victims, Lauren's body showed signs of torture. Her hands had been burned in places, apparently, by a bare electrical wire. However, this is the first victim that was abducted in front of a witness. Lauren had been seen talking to two men before getting inside their blue and white car, which did resemble a police cruiser. The Hillside Strangler was actually the Hillside StranglerS. This was supported by information that the police did not release publicly at the time. The second victim, Judy Miller, had not been dragged into the flower bed where she was found, but was carefully laid there and perhaps even posed. The other crime scenes were also missing drag marks and appeared to have been flung into place by two men, one at the head and the other at the feet. By December the 1st, there were 10 victims, and men who look like police officers could be the murderer. For many women in Los Angeles, there seemed to be no one to turn to for protection. A 17-year-old prostitute, Kimberly Martin, had taken the precaution of joining an escort agency so she wouldn't have to walk the streets at night like the other victims. Unfortunately, that didn't work. On December 14th, her body was found in an empty lot. Having received information that Martin's abduction had been heard by residents, detectives searched her apartment for any clues, but they didn't find anything conclusive. For the next 2 months, the Stranglers went quiet. The LA Police Department had formed a task force, and suspect after suspect was questioned extensively. Time after time, these suspects were cleared and released. The squad of approximately 130 officers and detectives were flooded with phone calls and false confessions, none leading to the actual culprits. The last victim was found on February 17, 1978. Cynthia Lee Hudspeth, a 20-year-old resident of Glendale, was in the trunk of her own orange Datsun. The car had been pushed over the cliff of Angeles Crest Highway. Her corpse revealed the ligature marks at the neck and wrists, and she was also stashed in the trunk without her clothing. The Stranglers went quiet for the rest of that year. The Hillside Strangler Task Force still took phone calls and letters from people they thought had leads. Experienced investigators knew that if the perpetrators were going to be found, they would have to strike again and hopefully make a mistake. On January 11, 1979, 2 co-eds were murdered in the state of Washington. 22-year-old Karen Mandick and 27-year-old Diane Wilder, both students attending Western Washington University, were found dead inside a car parked in an undeveloped residential area in East Edgemore. The MO seemed eerily similar to the Hillside Strangler killings. However, in this case, they found some interesting clues. There were some fibers found on the victim's shoes, gold in color, and a single human hair that didn't belong to the women. Then came the piece of evidence that everyone was looking for. A piece of paper was found in the women's apartment. On it, there was a note with a man's name. Detectives went to interview this man and located an unoccupied home. The owners of the house were vacationing, and only the security company had a key. Detectives soon put the pieces together. Kenneth Bianchi, 27 years old, was employed as a security officer for the company that watched over that empty home. He had waited 10 months after moving to Washington before deciding to strike again. Hillside Strangler Task Force members, detectives Dudley Varney and Frank Salerno, hopped on a plane headed for Washington to determine if Bianchi was indeed their man. During his interrogation, Bianchi claimed to have multiple personality disorder and went into theatrics in front of detectives to try to convince them of it. In his play acting, he confessed to being the Hillside Strangler. He failed to sell them on his insanity cover story, and realizing just how much trouble he had dug himself into, Bianchi basically threw his cousin under the bus. Angelo Buono Jr. of Hollywood was found at his auto interior shop and arrested. Fibers found on some of the Hillside Strangler victims matched some white carpeting found in that shop. Detectives discovered that the duo had been very efficient stalkers. They approached their victims while passing themselves off as police officers, cuffed their victims, making the telltale ligature marks found on the wrists of multiple victims, and then proceeded to sexually assault, murder, and then dispose of the bodies of these victims throughout the Hollywood and Glendale areas. The crimes were committed in the auto interior shop, with Angelo being the leader of the two. Kenneth was effectively a con man, creating phony diplomas for himself and passing himself off as a psychiatrist in the Los Angeles area, even sharing an office with a real one. Together, Buono and Bianchi also decided to become pimps and had at least 2 women working for them at one time. The two were put on trial, and in 1983 they each received a life sentence. Angelo Buono passed away from a heart attack in 2002. Kenneth Bianchi is still alive and serving his life sentence in Washington State Prison. However, Bianchi, clearly one of the world's worst criminals, is actually up for a parole review in 2025.